Everyone feared the Alpha King. Everyone except the Omega, who looked directly into his eyes and saw a lonely man beneath the crown. The grand halls of Moonvale Palace had never been this silent. Hundreds of nobles stood with lowered heads as Alexander Whitmore entered the royal chamber, carrying the presence of the most powerful Alpha in the kingdom. His name alone commanded respect. His decisions shaped territories. His voice could bring entire rooms to attention without a single raised word. To everyone watching, he was the perfect image of strength. The Alpha King who never hesitated. The ruler who never showed weakness. The man who stood above everyone else. But behind the royal title and the endless responsibilities, there was a truth few people knew. Alexander had spent years surrounded by people who respected his power, but never truly understood him. They saw the crown. They saw the authority. They saw the legend. But they never saw the person carrying the weight of it all. On the other side of the kingdom, Lillian Rosewood lived a completely different life. She was an Omega with no powerful family name, no influence among the nobles, and no desire to chase status. Many people believed an Omega like her should stay unnoticed. They believed kindness was a weakness and gentleness had no place in a world built around strength. But Lillian never accepted that idea. She believed every person deserved to be treated with dignity, no matter their position. She spent her days helping others, caring for those who needed support, and offering warmth in places where people had grown used to coldness. She did not do it because she wanted praise. She did it because that was simply who she was. Their paths crossed on a quiet evening inside the palace gardens. Alexander had stepped away from the crowded ceremony, searching for a moment of peace away from endless expectations. Lillian did not realize she was standing near the kingdom's most feared ruler. She only saw someone who looked exhausted, someone who seemed like they had been carrying too much for too long. While others would have stepped away in fear, Lillian simply spoke to him like any other person. "You look like you need a moment to breathe," she said gently. Alexander was surprised. No one spoke to him that way. No one looked past the title. For the first time in years, someone was not trying to impress him, gain something from him, or prove their importance. Someone was simply being kind. The moment was brief, but something about it stayed with him. The Alpha King who had everything suddenly found himself thinking about the one person who treated him as if he had nothing to prove. Lillian walked away without realizing she had changed something inside him. She did not know that her simple kindness had reached the heart of a man who believed he had forgotten what being understood felt like. And Alexander did not know that the Omega who saw him as a person instead of a king would soon become the one person his entire world could not ignore. After that evening in the palace gardens, Alexander Whitmore found himself thinking about a conversation that should have meant nothing. It was only a few words from an Omega he barely knew. Yet those words stayed with him longer than the countless speeches and praises he had heard throughout his years as Alpha King. Lillian Rosewood had not treated him like a ruler. She had not looked at him with fear or admiration. She had simply noticed that he was tired. And somehow, that simple kindness felt more valuable than everything people had offered him before. In the days that followed, Alexander began noticing Lillian more often. Not because he was searching for a reason to meet her, but because her presence stood out in a palace where everyone seemed careful with every word they spoke. While nobles competed for attention and influence, Lillian quietly helped the palace staff, listened to their concerns, and offered encouragement to those who rarely received it. She never acted differently because someone important was nearby. She was the same person whether anyone was watching or not. Alexander found that unusual. In his world, many people showed kindness when they wanted something in return. But Lillian gave it freely. One afternoon, Alexander saw her helping a young servant who had made a small mistake during preparations for a royal event. Instead of criticizing the servant, Lillian offered calm advice and reminded them that everyone deserved patience while learning. From a distance, Alexander watched the moment carefully. It was not a grand display. There were no witnesses applauding. There was no reward waiting afterward. Yet that small act revealed more about Lillian's character than any formal introduction could have. She truly does not care about status, Ethan Caldwell, Alexander's trusted guard, said when he noticed the king watching. Alexander remained quiet for a moment before answering. That is exactly what makes her different. Ethan had served the Alpha King for years. and he had seen many people attempt to gain Alexander's attention. But he had never seen Alexander become curious about someone who wanted nothing from him. Meanwhile, Lillian had no idea that the most powerful man in Moonvale Kingdom had begun noticing the little things she did. She continued living her simple life, unaware that her kindness had reached someone who had spent years believing he had to carry everything alone. To Lillian, Alexander was still the quiet man she met in the garden. She did not know the full weight of his responsibilities. She did not know how many people depended on his decisions. She only knew that behind his serious expression, she sensed someone who rarely allowed himself to rest. That understanding was what made Alexander pause whenever he saw her. She did not try to change him. She did not try to impress him. She simply reminded him that he was more than a title. As the days passed, whispers began spreading throughout the palace. People wondered why the Alpha King seemed interested in an ordinary Omega. Some nobles questioned why someone like Lillian had caught his attention. They could not understand what Alexander saw in her. But Alexander understood something they did not. Strength was not only found in those who commanded armies or ruled kingdoms. Sometimes the strongest person in the room was the one who could remain gentle in a world that constantly demanded hardness. And for the first time in many years, the Alpha King began wondering if the person who understood him the most was the one person everyone else overlooked. The whispers inside Moonvale Palace grew stronger with every passing day. The nobles could not understand why the Alpha King seemed different whenever Lillian Rosewood was nearby. They had spent years watching Alexander Whitmore remain distant and unreadable. Yet a simple Omega with no powerful background had somehow reached the part of him that no one else could see. But while the palace focused on rumors, Lillian continued living the same way she always had. She never believed she had done anything extraordinary. She only believed people deserved kindness. One morning, Lillian was asked to assist during a small gathering at the royal gardens. She expected it to be another ordinary task, but she soon noticed that the atmosphere changed the moment Alexander arrived. Everyone became careful with their words. Everyone stood straighter. Everyone remembered that the person in front of them was the Alpha King. Lillian noticed the difference immediately. She saw how people respected his position but rarely treated him naturally. Later, when the garden became quiet, Alexander approached her. "Do you always speak to everyone this easily?" he asked. Lillian looked surprised by the question. "I suppose I do," she replied. "Why?" Alexander paused. He was not used to someone answering him without carefully choosing every word. "Most people are careful around me." Lillian smiled gently. "Maybe they are careful because they see the crown before they see you." Those words stayed with him. For years, Alexander had accepted that distance came with leadership. He believed being alone was simply the cost of being powerful. But Lillian saw something different. She saw that even the strongest person could become tired. She saw that even a king could need someone who simply listened. As their conversations continued, Alexander discovered small details about Lillian that made her unlike anyone he had known. She remembered the names of palace workers. She noticed when someone was having a difficult day. She offered encouragement without expecting recognition. Her kindness was not something she performed. It was part of who she was. Ethan Caldwell watched the changes carefully. He had served Alexander long enough to notice things others missed. The Alpha King was still disciplined. He was still responsible. But there was a new calmness around him. "You seem different," Ethan said one evening. Alexander looked toward the palace gardens where Lillian was walking among the flowers. "She reminds me that not everything has to be a responsibility." Ethan understood then. Lillian had not captured the king's attention through ambition or status. She had done it by showing him something he had forgotten, that he was a person before he was a ruler. However, not everyone in the kingdom welcomed this change. Victoria Ashford, a respected alpha from a powerful family, watched the growing connection with concern. She believed someone like Lillian did not belong near the throne. To her, an Omega without influence could never understand the world Alexander lived in. But Victoria misunderstood the very thing that made Lillian special. Lillian was not trying to enter Alexander's world. She was reminding him that he did not have to carry that world alone. And as the distance between the Alpha King and the Omega slowly disappeared, The entire kingdom began approaching a moment that would change everything. Because sometimes the person who changes a king's heart is not the one who seeks power. It is the one who never wanted anything except to see him smile. The days passed quietly in Moonvale Palace, but the connection between Alexander Whitmore and Lillian Rosewood continued growing in ways neither of them expected. To everyone watching from the outside, it seemed impossible. The Alpha King, a man known for his discipline and distance, had begun spending time with an Omega who had no powerful family, no political influence, and no desire to gain either. But those who truly understood Alexander began noticing something important. He was not becoming weaker. He was becoming more himself. Lillian never tried to change the Alpha King. She never asked him to abandon his responsibilities or become someone else. She simply reminded him that even the strongest person deserved moments of peace. One afternoon, Alexander invited Lillian to walk through the royal gardens after a long day of meetings. The gardens were quiet, filled with the soft sounds of nature and the gentle movement of the wind. For once, the Alpha King was not surrounded by advisors or nobles waiting for decisions. He was simply a man walking beside someone who made him feel understood. "You are different from everyone here," Alexander said. Lillian looked at him curiously. "Is that a good thing?" A small smile appeared on his face. "I think it is." Lillian laughed softly, surprised to see such a simple expression from someone known for being serious. That small moment meant more to Alexander than she realized. For years, people had praised his strength but rarely cared about his feelings. They admired the crown but ignored the person beneath it. Lillian did the opposite. She ignored the crown and saw the person. Meanwhile, rumors continued spreading throughout the kingdom. Some people admired the change in their Alpha King, while others questioned it. The noble families believed Alexander should choose someone with equal status and influence. They could not understand why he valued a person who did not seek power. Victoria Ashford was among those who struggled the most with this reality. She had spent years believing that the path to the throne was based on reputation, family connections, and social standing. To her, Lillian represented everything the traditional nobles overlooked. A gentle Omega who proved that worth was not created by a title. One evening, Victoria approached Lillian during a palace gathering. Her words were polite, but her meaning was clear. She questioned whether Lillian truly understood the world surrounding the Alpha King. Lillian listened calmly. She could have responded with anger, but she chose honesty instead. "I do not need to understand everything about his world to respect him," Lillian said. "I only need to remember that he is a person before he is a king." Those words reached Alexander, who happened to hear the conversation from nearby. Once again, he was reminded why Lillian was different. She never fought to prove she belonged beside him. She simply treated him with the same kindness she offered everyone else. Later that night, Alexander stood on the balcony overlooking Moonvale Kingdom. Ethan Caldwell joined him quietly. "You know the kingdom will talk," Ethan said. Alexander looked toward the lights below. "Let them talk." For the first time in years, Alexander was not making a choice based on expectations. He was making a choice based on what felt true. And as Lillian continued to show him a world beyond duty and power, the Alpha King began realizing something that changed everything. The person who made him feel the most understood was the person everyone else had failed to notice. The connection between Alexander Whitmore and Lillian Rosewood became impossible for the kingdom to ignore. What started as a few quiet conversations in the palace gardens had slowly transformed the atmosphere of Moonvale. The Alpha King who once carried every responsibility alone now allowed someone to stand beside him without fear or hesitation. But while Alexander began discovering a different side of life, the people around him were beginning to question what this change meant for the future of the kingdom. The noble families gathered behind closed doors, discussing the Omega who had captured the attention of their ruler. They believed an Alpha King needed a partner with influence, a powerful family name, and a position that could strengthen the throne. They could not understand why Alexander valued someone who had none of those things. To them, Lillian was simply an Omega who had been fortunate enough to gain the king's attention. But they did not know what Alexander knew. They did not know about the moments when Lillian listened without judgment. They did not know how she noticed the small struggles of people others ignored. They did not know that her kindness was not an act created for the palace. It had existed long before she ever met the Alpha King. One morning, Alexander invited Lillian to join him during a visit outside the palace. He wanted her to see the kingdom beyond the walls where she had spent most of her life. As they traveled through the villages of Moonvale, Lillian noticed how many people respected Alexander not because they feared him but because they trusted him. She saw the dedication behind his decisions and understood the pressure he carried every day. "You carry everyone's problems as if they are your own," she said quietly. Alexander looked at her. "Is that a bad thing?" Lillian shook her head. "No. But even a strong person needs someone to remind them they do not have to carry everything alone." Those words stayed with him. For years, Alexander believed leadership meant standing apart. He believed a ruler had to be untouchable to remain respected. But Lillian showed him something different. A true leader did not need to hide every emotion. A true leader could be strong while still allowing others to care. However, not everyone was willing to accept this change. Victoria Ashford continued watching carefully. She had always believed she understood what Alexander needed. She believed power should be matched with power, and that emotions had no place in royal decisions. But what she failed to understand was that Alexander was not searching for someone who could strengthen his position. He had spent his entire life surrounded by people who wanted something from him. Lillian was the first person who wanted nothing except for him to be happy. During a royal gathering, the tension became impossible to hide. Several nobles questioned whether an Omega could truly stand beside the Alpha King. Before Lillian could respond, Alexander calmly stepped forward. His voice remained controlled, but everyone understood the importance of his words. The value of a person is not decided by their title. The room became silent. For the first time, the kingdom heard the Alpha King defend someone not because of duty, but because he believed in her. Lillian looked at him with surprise. She had never asked him to protect her. She had never expected him to choose her. But Alexander had already made a decision. He was no longer following the expectations of others. He was following the truth he had discovered. And that truth was simple. The Omega everyone underestimated was the person who had helped him find the part of himself he thought he had lost. The words spoken by Alexander Whitmore during the royal gathering changed the atmosphere throughout Moonvale Kingdom. For years, the Alpha King had been known as someone who followed tradition and carried the expectations of the throne without question. But now, everyone had witnessed something they never expected. Alexander had chosen to defend an Omega not because of obligation, but because he believed in her. Lillian Rosewood never asked for that moment. She never wanted attention from the nobles or recognition from the kingdom. In fact, the sudden focus made her uncomfortable. She had spent her entire life avoiding attention, choosing quiet acts of kindness over public recognition. Yet Alexander saw something in her that others failed to notice. He saw courage hidden beneath gentleness. He saw strength that did not need to announce itself. In the days following the gathering, rumors continued spreading throughout Moonvale. Some people admired the Alpha King's choice, while others questioned it. Many nobles believed they knew what was best for the kingdom. They believed power should always stand beside power. They could not understand why Alexander valued someone whose greatest strength was her heart. But Alexander had stopped listening to those expectations. For the first time, he was making decisions based on what felt right rather than what was expected. Ethan Caldwell noticed the change more than anyone. As the Alpha King's closest guard, he had spent years watching Alexander place the needs of the kingdom above his own happiness. "You seem more at peace," Ethan said during a quiet evening in the palace. Alexander looked toward the gardens where Lillian often spent her time. "I forgot what it felt like to be seen as more than a title." Ethan understood immediately. Lillian had never tried to reach the Alpha King. She had reached Alexander the person. Meanwhile, Lillian struggled with the attention surrounding her. She wondered if she truly belonged in a world filled with royal traditions and powerful families. She worried that being near Alexander would create problems for him. When she shared those concerns, Alexander listened carefully. "Do you think I chose you because I needed someone to complete my image?" he asked. Lillian remained quiet. Alexander continued, "I chose you because you remind me who I am when I am not carrying a crown." Those words touched Lillian deeply. She had always believed that kindness meant helping others without expecting anything in return. She never imagined that one day, someone would value that same kindness in her. However, the growing connection between them also revealed hidden tensions within the kingdom. Victoria Ashford and several nobles continued searching for reasons to separate them. They believed Lillian was changing Alexander's priorities. They did not understand that she was not taking him away from his responsibilities. She was helping him approach them with a clearer heart. As preparations began for the Moonveil Unity ceremony, the entire kingdom waited to see what Alexander would do next. Many expected him to follow tradition and choose a partner based on status. But those who truly understood him knew something had changed. The Alpha King who once stood alone had finally found someone who made him feel understood. And as the ceremony approached, everyone would soon discover that Alexander Whitmore was no longer willing to hide the person who had changed his world. The Moonveil Unity ceremony arrived with the entire kingdom watching closely. The grand halls were filled with nobles, leaders, and families from every corner of the territory. For many, this ceremony represented tradition and the future of the Alpha King's reign. They expected Alexander Whitmore to make a choice that followed generations of expectations. They expected a decision based on power, influence, and alliances. But Alexander had already discovered something far more valuable than tradition. He had discovered someone who saw him beyond the crown. Lillian Rosewood stood quietly among the guests, unsure of what the evening would bring. She never imagined herself standing in a place like this. She was not raised among powerful families. She did not grow up learning how to navigate royal expectations. She was simply an Omega who believed kindness mattered more than status. Yet somehow that belief had brought her to the center of the kingdom's attention. As the ceremony continued, whispers moved through the crowd. Some questioned why Alexander would choose someone like Lillian. Others wondered how an Omega without influence could possibly stand beside the strongest Alpha in Moonveil. But Alexander heard those whispers and remained calm. He had spent his entire life listening to what others believed he should do. Tonight he was choosing what he believed was right. When Alexander stepped forward, the entire hall became silent. His presence carried the authority of a king, but his expression showed something different. There was no distance, no coldness, only certainty. For years everyone has told me what a king should be, Alexander said. They told me strength meant standing alone. They told me power meant never showing doubt. But I learned something important. A person does not become stronger by refusing connection. They become stronger when they find someone who reminds them of their true self. Everyone listened carefully. Lillian looked at him with surprise. She had never asked him to make this choice. She had never wanted him to challenge the traditions of the kingdom for her. But Alexander continued. Lillian Rosewood never saw the title. She saw the person. She never looked for my power. She offered kindness when she had nothing to gain. The words moved through the chamber. Even those who had doubted Lillian began understanding why the Alpha King valued her. She had not earned her place through ambition. She had earned it through sincerity. Victoria Ashford watched silently from among the nobles. For the first time, she realized that Alexander's decision was not based on emotion alone. It was based on respect. Lillian had changed the way he viewed leadership itself. After the ceremony, Alexander found Lillian in the quiet palace gardens. She looked uncertain, still trying to understand everything that had happened. I never wanted to create problems for you, she said softly. Alexander smiled. You did not create problems. You reminded me what truly matters. Lillian looked at him, and for the first time she understood that she was not standing beside him because of a title. She was there because she had become someone he trusted completely. Across Moonveil Kingdom, people began seeing their Alpha King differently. They realized that the person who changed him was not someone powerful or ambitious. She was someone who offered kindness without expecting anything in return. And as the kingdom moved into a new chapter, one truth became impossible to ignore. The strongest Alpha in the land had found the one person who made him feel truly understood. The days following the Moonveil Unity ceremony brought a new feeling throughout the kingdom. For the first time in many years, the people saw their Alpha King not only as a powerful ruler, but as someone who had found peace within himself. Alexander Whitmore continued carrying his responsibilities with the same dedication as before, but something had changed. He no longer believed that leadership required him to stand alone. Lillian Rosewood had shown him that accepting support was not a weakness. It was a different kind of strength. As Lillian adjusted to her new place beside the Alpha King, she remained the same person everyone had known before. She still visited the villages. She still listened to ordinary people. She still offered kindness without expecting recognition. The only difference was that now, more people were paying attention. Many who once overlooked her began seeking her advice. They realized that Lillian's greatest gift was not her connection to the throne. It was her ability to understand people. She had a way of seeing struggles that others ignored and offering comfort when it was needed most. Alexander admired that quality more every day. One evening, he walked with Lillian through the palace gardens where they first met. The same flowers surrounded them, and the same peaceful atmosphere filled the air. "Do you ever miss the days when nobody knew who you were?" Alexander asked. Lillian smiled softly. "Sometimes. But I think those days helped me become who I am now." Alexander looked thoughtful. "You never tried to change your life. You simply lived according to what you believed was right." Lillian nodded. "I think everyone has value before anyone recognizes it." Those words stayed with Alexander because they represented the lesson he had learned through knowing her. For years, he had believed people became important because of their achievements, their family names, or their positions. Lillian showed him that importance came from the way people treated others when no one was watching. However, not everyone accepted the kingdom's transformation easily. Some nobles struggled with the idea that an Omega could influence the future of Moonvale. They had spent generations believing that status determined worth. But slowly, they began witnessing the results of Alexander and Lillian's partnership. The kingdom became more connected. People felt heard. Decisions were made with greater understanding. The change was not created by power alone. It was created by compassion working alongside leadership. Victoria Ashford also began seeing the truth she had refused to accept. She had believed Lillian was simply a temporary presence in Alexander's life. But she realized something important. Lillian was not beside the Alpha King because she wanted influence. She was beside him because she brought out the best in him. Meanwhile, Alexander discovered that the bond he shared with Lillian was unlike anything he had experienced before. It was not built on expectations or appearances. It was built on trust, respect, and the simple moments where they could be themselves. The kingdom had once wondered why an Alpha King would choose an Omega like Lillian Rosewood. Now they understood the answer. He did not choose her because she was the most powerful person in the room. He chose her because she was the one person who never needed him to be powerful at all. And as Moonvale entered a new era, everyone began to understand the truth behind their story. A gentle heart had changed the strongest king, and a king had finally learned that being understood was the greatest treasure of all. Years passed in Moonvale Kingdom, and the story of Alexander Whitmore and Lillian Rosewood became a reminder that true strength was never measured by power alone. The Alpha King, who once stood distant from everyone around him, had become a ruler known not only for his wisdom but also for the compassion he showed to his people. And beside him was the Omega, who had never tried to become important, yet became the person who changed an entire kingdom. Lillian continued to bring warmth wherever she went. She never forgot the life she lived before entering the palace. She remembered the days when people overlooked her, when her kindness was considered ordinary, and when many believed an Omega could never influence the future of Moonvale. Those memories kept her humble and reminded her that every person deserved respect, no matter their position. Alexander often watched her interact with others and felt grateful for the simple truth she had taught him. A crown could command attention, but it could not create genuine connection. A title could create respect, but it could not create trust. Those things were earned through actions, through patience, and through the way someone treated others when there was nothing to gain. One quiet evening, Alexander and Lillian returned to the garden where their journey began. The place looked almost exactly the same, with soft lights shining through the trees and flowers moving gently in the evening breeze. Alexander looked around and smiled. "Do you remember this place?" he asked. Lillian smiled back. "Of course. This was where you were not the Alpha King for a moment." Alexander laughed softly. And this was where you treated me like a person instead of a ruler. That memory remained one of the most meaningful moments of his life. Before meeting Lillian, Alexander believed that being strong meant hiding every uncertainty and carrying every responsibility alone. But she showed him that even the strongest person could find comfort in being understood. Their connection had never been about status. It had never been about what one person could offer the other. It was about two people who discovered that they were better together than they were apart. Across Moonvale Kingdom, the people who once questioned their bond eventually understood the lesson behind it. Lillian did not become important because she stood beside the Alpha King. She stood beside him because she had always been important. Her value existed long before anyone recognized it. Alexander did not become a better king because he gained more power. He became a better king because he learned compassion, patience, and the importance of listening. The kingdom changed because its ruler discovered that kindness was not a weakness. It was a strength that could inspire others. And the Omega who once seemed invisible became the person everyone remembered. Not because she sought attention, not because she demanded recognition, but because she proved that the gentlest heart could leave the greatest mark. In the end, the Alpha King did not find someone who completed his crown. He found someone who reminded him that beneath every title, every responsibility, and every expectation, there was still a person who deserved to be understood. And Lillian discovered that the world would always make room for those who chose kindness, even when kindness was the one thing others underestimated.